Latin America and the Caribbean boasts significant mineral and energy resources, as well as a history of innovative renewable energy projects. The region is expected to play an increasingly important role in the global energy scene, but it also faces challenges stemming from geopolitical tensions. So, how are the various countries in the region currently navigating their course? Today, we will highlight success stories from the region and present a regional outlook on international cooperation.
And welcome, everyone, to this spotlight on Latin America and the Caribbean region. And if you're a regular at the Berlin Energy Transition Dialogue, dear audience, then you know that sharing best practices is one of the main things that we do here. And in the case of the region we're about to talk about, there is certainly a lot to share. In its latest report, its first specialist report on Latin America and the Caribbean, the International Energy Agency points out that 60% of the region's power already comes from renewable sources and declares that the abundant resources there, including not only wind and sun, but of course also water and critical minerals, will give it a vital role in the global energy transition. In this session, we want to begin with an overview of lessons learned from Latin American and Caribbean countries' efforts to boost renewables, to look at both successes and challenges, and ask how the region's positioning itself for the future. And it's a pleasure to welcome an outstanding group of leaders from government, international financial institutions, and industry. And I'm going to hop around a bit when I introduce all of you, so maybe just raise your hands so that the audience knows about whom I'm speaking when I introduce you. And I'll begin with Dr. Michelle Bachelet. She is chairwoman of the Hydrogen Strategic Committee of Chile. She has twice served as president of Chile, as you undoubtedly know. She was the first woman, not only in that post, but also to hold the portfolio of her country's Ministry of Defense. She was also the first director of UN Women, and most recently served as UN High Commissioner for Human Rights. We're very proud to have you on our panel. And skipping now down to Elisa Facio. She is Minister of Industry, Energy and Mining for Uruguay, which with nearly 100% renewable power has already completed its first energy transition and says it's now ready to move on to its second. We're very, very pleased to have you with us. Welcome. And it is a pleasure to welcome Rodrigo Rollenberg. He is Secretary of Green Economy, Decarbonization and Bioindustry at Brazil's Ministry of Development, Industry, Trade and Services. A former senator, he presided over the legislature's Committee on Environment and Consumer Protection. Thank you so much for joining. Right in the middle is Marcelino Madrigal. He is chief of the energy division at the Inter-American Development Bank. He's a specialist in market design and regulation related to decarbonization of the power sector, and has also served on the Regulatory Commission in Mexico and as senior energy specialist at the World Bank. Great that you can be with us, Mr. Marcelino. I'm very pleased to welcome Monica Escalante. She is founder and CEO of the Panama-based company Neo Energy, an engineering company that is dedicated to providing energy efficiency solutions, solar energy, electric mobility, and related digital technologies. And she also sits on the board of directors of the Panamanian Solar Energy Chamber. Thank you for being here. And finally, it's a pleasure to welcome Gianni Chianetta. He's founder and chairman of the Greening the Islands Foundation, which supports innovative approaches to sustainability on behalf of islands across the world. He's had a long career in the renewable energy sector, including as a board member and secretary of the Global Solar Alliance. It's wonderful that you can join. And I will just say that two of our panel members will be speaking in their native languages, Minister Facio and Secretary Rollenberg, Spanish and Portuguese, respectively. So if you need a translation, please do get your headsets ready. And I'd like to begin with a question to all of you, dear ladies and gentlemen, a poll for you. If you'll take out your mobile devices, please, and go to our website, our Slido website, you will find this question. Please prioritize these key challenges based on their perceived importance, starting with the most urgent and going down to the least, in driving the energy transition in Latin America and the Caribbean. So if number 1 is your most urgent and number 6 is your least urgent, please rank those, and we will come back to that a little bit later. It's one of our more challenging questions, but it's a great way to stay awake at this hour of the afternoon. And by the way, if you don't know the region well, please give us your ranking anyway, just in terms of what you think should be prioritized overall. Thank you very much. And let us now begin our first round of discussion with a look at the state of the energy transition in your specific countries or regions or institutions. And I'd like to begin with an overview and ask you also, if you want, to weave in references to these measures, but only if you want, because otherwise we'll come back to that a little bit later on. Michelle Bachelet. Renewable energy production rose from 6 to 17% of Chile's energy mix during your second term in office. What were your lessons learned on the success factors to boost the RE sector?
Well, let me start with a little bit of context. In 2014, when we arrived in government, we saw that the energy sector lacked of a consensual, if I would say, medium and long-term view of how to develop. And then we decided to start developing a national energy policy. We did it in a very participatory way. So many stakeholders were part of this discussion because we thought that in a sector as important as energy, if you need to make reforms, if you need to go through changes like the transition process, you need to build, if I would say, alliances. You need to build the force to make these strong changes with the companies, but also with society and also with the civil society. The market was concentrated, very highly concentrated, with several challenges. We had high electricity prices, we had polluting electricity matrix, and we had a lot of instability because our transmission system was operating with 2 separate electricity grids. So we had a lot of challenges. On the other hand, we needed clean energy. And so the idea was, the only lesson learned is that when you want those changes, you need to make it in a participatory way. That's the first thing. The second thing that I would like to highlight is that when you need to think on energy in a long perspective. It has to go not only in the administration where you're going, you need to think on the state, on the country, in the long perspective. So that's why you need to build all this consensus on what you're going to do in the country. And it worked. The first message I can say, it can be done. As you said, when we arrived, only 3% of the technology generation was through because of wind and solar generation. And we ended like 11, more, and 10 years after, now we have, following the starting path, we are close to 40% right now in Chile. I think that another important issue was to foster a climate of collaboration and cooperation between the state, the companies, the academia, and the civil society, because that permitted to lay the groundwork to make those very important changes in terms of reforms and in terms of tender, as we did processes, mechanism. And that was very important, but also because that allowed us to have a more competitive market. That was also, and to promote renewable energies as a viable and sustainable alternative. So because we needed to convince everyone that that was the way to go on. And that happened because we did that. We work with everyone, we collaborate, and we find that there was a great opportunity as a country to develop renewable energies, thinking on the future and on our commitment with the need of decarbonize the electricity and the energy in our country.
Interesting. So you're saying buy-in and cooperation essentially on two levels, on getting a plan and goals, and then secondly, on how to implement the process. So thank you very much. Let me jump over to Minister Facio, if I may. And as I mentioned, Uruguay is a renewable energy star, world star. What factors helped you complete your first energy transition so successfully? And what advice can you give from your experience to countries that are currently heavily reliant on fossil fuels? You need to use your microphone so the translators can hear you. Thank you.
Hola. Sí. Okay.
Can you hear me all right? Okay, excellent. Thank you very much for this. Thank you for inviting me to speak on this panel. And first of all, I would like to mention something that does not only apply to Uruguay, but the whole region, all of Latin America, and especially South America. It's a region where, from a historic point of view, energy has always been sustainable, or at least much more sustainable than in the rest of the world. In Uruguay, but also in other countries in the region, the uptake of renewable energies was always promoted through competitive processes, and these processes were already very competitive the last century. And one lesson learned was, for example, that we have to choose our own path, because we know the conditions, and these might be very different from country to country. We've been using water in Uruguay since the last century, for example, and that was the first step in Uruguay towards renewable energy. And on this basis, we already achieved 40% of our electricity production at the end of the last century, and we then expanded this process to cover also other renewable resources with the same goal of decarbonizing our energy mix. And we also applied mechanisms such as the production of biofuels, wind energy, solar energy. And this also meant that in a period of only about 10 years, we very quickly were in a position to integrate renewable resources in our energy mix, and at the same time, our natural oil consumption was as low as in the 1950s. So the development was very quick. For society, but also for industry. So all the vehicles, cars, the number of vehicles tripled. And today we can be proud to say that behind Denmark, Uruguay uses the most wind energy and solar energy in its energy mix. We can really see this as a revolution of our energy matrix, because we implemented measures that also secured investment and financing, so that we were able to implement this. For example, tax incentives to promote investment. That was one of the means that we used. But also integrating research and development and innovation. We also involved society from an early stage in the projects. So the uptake of renewable resources and renewable energy was sustainable not only in terms of ecology, but also in terms of the economy, because the energy costs in Uruguay are now very low.
Thank you very much. And I'm interested to hear the synergies between what you've just told us and Michelle Bachelet's analysis, especially in regard to including academia and research and also participation. Quite interesting. Let me go over to Secretary Rollenberg. And Brazil's primary energy demand has doubled since 1990. And yet the country is now cleaner than many when it comes to energy, with more than 48% coming from renewable sources. So how did you manage that feat, facing rising, skyrocketing demand and simultaneously greening the energy supply? And what is the current state of the transition? What would you say are your biggest successes and lessons learned?
Bom, boa tarde a todas e a todos. É uma honra poder participar desse evento. Eu digo com muita convicção.
Hello, everyone. It is a great honor to be part of this panel. I'm deeply convinced and would like to say also on behalf of our ambassador to Germany here in Berlin, Brazil is a strategic country when it comes to food security, energy security, and climate action. Brazil has decided to develop low-carbon farming. Together with the chair of the Environment Commission, we have now developed a law that will make sure that 80% of the Amazon will be a reserve area. The Cerrado in the center of Brazil is also an important aspect in that regard. So when it comes to forestry, to farming, we want to link that with the people, and this causes sustainable farming in Brazil. And it's important for us to address the question of energy. We have an ethanol program in Brazil which aims at 27% of fuels in Brazil that contain methanol in its mix. And this rate will be increased to 35%. 40% of biofuels are in the mix, and last week we decided that we want to see a sustainable increase to 25%. We've invested a lot in wind energy in Brazil and also in solar energy. And in this way, we are now in a position where 48.6% of our energy mix of our clean energy, and that is more than in the OECD. And 90% of electricity in our country is clean electricity. And when it comes to climate fitness, we can say that President Lula, and here I'd like to thank Germany for your support, that with the Lula government, we have now reduced deforestation by 48%. And this shows the strong commitment that Brazil has made to really advance the energy transition and protect our climate. We want to collaborate with all countries, but it is highly important to understand that the policy areas must be developed to serve the interests of everyone. It does not make sense to import resources from developing countries and at the same time exporting energy. So we need to create value not only in industrialized countries but also in developing countries. There can be no energy transition without changes to industrial production. Supply chains and value creation chains mean that we need to see changes and development in developing countries. It's important to remind everybody that the implications of climate change affect everybody, but they affect and impact developing countries most severely. So it does not make sense to have climate protection funds if they are not used to support also those countries who do not contribute a lot to reducing carbon emissions of our planet. We have cheap energy, we have clean energies and safe energies at our disposal. And we are convinced that the Berlin Energy Transition Dialogue is very important to make progress together. We need to work together. And in order for the energy transition to be just and equitable, we need to have global benefits. And only in this way will we be able to advance the COP28 agenda of tripling up and doubling down by 2030.
Thank you very much. Let me go over now to Marcelino Madrigal and shift focus to the Caribbean. And Caribbean region countries often face particular challenges in transitioning to renewables, including vulnerability to extreme weather and climate impacts, small grids, and other factors. Yet, many of these countries have very high renewable energy targets. So tell us a little bit about how you at IADB are supporting these islands and regions in implementing projects that address both the challenges and the targets.
Thank you. That's quite a question, and thanks for the invitation to the Berlin Transition Dialogue. I think, and just before answering your question, I wanted to put in the mind of the audience what Latin America has achieved. So 60% clean electricity, 98% access to electricity by all the people. There are more than 5,000 electric buses already on the streets in Latin America. Chile made its first shipment of e-fuels to Europe, but that development is not even across the region. And we at the IDB have been partner of this, energy transformations in the region. And I think this has been so because of two critical factors: resources. Latin America is blessed with resources, and the other, institutions. And institutions are critical to the results the region has achieved. The formal institutions in the sector, the policymakers, the regulators, the operators, and all civil society that needs to agree on what is in Latin America to move the energy transition. So since that development is not even, one place where there are important challenges is the Caribbean, as you said so. Because they are small economies, still rely close to 80% on fossil fuels. They spend around 5 to 15% of their GDP in fuel and food. So fuel and food, what powers the economy and what powers our bodies. And natural disasters are already impacting the Caribbean. Any hurricane can impact, from 2% to 6% of the GDP, much more than in any other country, because a hurricane, giving the small islands, they can destroy basically all your power infrastructure in just one storm that we are seeing more and more frequent. So definitely the Caribbean deserves a special attention because they are not contributing to emissions, but they are seeing already the impacts of climate change. So there is an important to focus on the particular challenges of the region. And we are doing so. We are fine-tuning our approach in the Caribbean. The IDB launched a new initiative, which is called IDB Caribbean, to focus on resiliency, among other things. Examples of this is our work to rebuild infrastructure after hurricanes, combining two instruments, financial instruments like disaster insurance instruments that can be triggered right after the storm arrives, and we did that in the Bahamas after the hurricane in 2019, and then also rebuilding more resilient infrastructure. There are ways in which you can build more resilient solar power plants. They are more expensive, but it pays off. So another area of need to improve, concessional financing and blending financing to make sure that we can rebuild infrastructure that is more expensive, but at the end pays off. For example, in the Bahamas, we were able to finance the largest battery in the Caribbean, which is going to help the Bahamas restore the system quicker when a storm happens, because usually the fuel cannot get to the port when you have a hurricane, and an electric battery can help right away. So that is one, preparing the systems for resiliency. and the other, and I react on the answers to this panel and the previous, building the appropriate institutional framework to allow private investment to flow, and we're supporting Jamaica developing, RFPs for solar, for wind energy. We're supporting Barbados to develop the regulatory framework for storage, for distributed energy generation, and for large and small scale distributed solutions. So that's where we are in the Caribbean, which is important to mention some of the differences, and then I'll explain later more details on other regions. Thank you.
Thank you. Very interesting. And your remarks about rebuilding infrastructure to be more resilient remind me that we so often think in these boxes: mitigation, adaptation, you've got financing sources for this one and financing sources for that one, but in fact, so often those lines are blurred, and we need to take that into account in our planning. So finally, coming to Monica Escalante, waiting patiently here. You are private sector based in Panama. Tell us how you would describe the enabling environment set by national policy, how that affects your industries as they seek to gain a foothold, and what has changed in the last few years.
Okay. Well, good afternoon. Well, yeah, to answer that, I will just talk a little bit about Panama figures. So Panama is super, super blessed in terms of natural resources. We do have their river, wind, solar, and also we have this rainforest. I'm talking this because Panama is within the 3 countries in the world that are carbon negative, which means that we capture more than we generate, okay? So we are negative. So that's a good news. So that's why we are working so hard to keep that position. And in terms of our matrix, it's super renewable as well. Actually, last year was 60% coming from renewable sources, 45% is hydropower, and 8% of it is sun. The rest is wind. And Panama is also working on hydrogen strategy. It's looking to be the hub for America, for Latin America, and to be like clean storage to supply the chips. As you know, we are a big hub. And in terms of what is enabling the numbers that we have now, I will talk about the distributed generation, solar distributed generation. So last year we grew 44%, and we are looking to this year to grow 55%. And the reasons is a combination of factors. I would say that this administration, this government is so focused on energy transition that we have a framework and a regulation that they are working, actually. We also have the banks now, practically private and public banks are financing any kind of solar project, could be residential to commercial, industrial. And again, Panama is a hub, so you have a big offer there. So you find basically all manufacturers there. And I will take just a little bit more just to talk about the good news about solar thermal, because it's so important for the decarbonization and the energy transition, especially for the industry. So Panama got this grant for $2.2 million in 2018 to develop the solar water heaters in Panama. So the UN Environment Agency executed this program, and after 3 years, we can tell that we have their norms, standards, we have labs, we have university curricula, we have new businesses, we have new jobs, we have a national plan on solar thermal, and the target is to install 1.5 million square meters of solar collectors, which is, very ambitious, but we are working on. And to the date, we have avoided 500 emissions through that program. So this is good news for Panama.
Thank you very much. And that means it's good news for everybody, being carbon negative. Let me now finally go to Gianni Chianetta, also waiting very patiently. This is a big panel. It takes a while. You've been closely following the energy transition in some small island developing states in the Caribbean. So also share your view, and I know you have an overview because you're very well acquainted with many other islands as well. How do you think the Caribbean nations stand out?
Yes, just to give some numbers, an overview. Anyway, totally in the island state, the seeds, we have around 6 gigawatt of renewables, and the Caribbean count half of it, only the Caribbean. And the big progress was made from 2014 to today, anyway, from 1 gigawatt that was mainly due to the hydropower to the 3 gigawatt now that with a big contribution of solar that anyway increased 7 times, also wind 2 times. But there are also a very nice pilot on geothermal, marine energy, biofuel. So there are, and all renewables are there, let me say. And I'd like to, anyway, I was right 3 weeks ago in Jamaica and Barbuda, Antigua Barbuda, meet all the Caribbean islands. And indeed, by the way, we are preparing the SIDS4, which is the biggest conference of United Nations on islands happening end of May. It's happening every 10 years, grouping more than 4,000 island stakeholders there. And let me say that there are in the Caribbean good example, anyway, of countries like Dominican Republic that has reached 17% of renewables, mainly thanks to a law of a tax incentive. There is an exemption for equipment from renewables plants product, and also a release on the tariff on the electricity. And there is a target also to reach 25% by 2025. So there are good examples in the islands of policies that can unlock really the renewables, but there are many challenges. Let me say, I'd like to comment on what the colleague said from the Caribbean. Indeed, the islands has not caused the climate change, but they are paying for that. But what is the challenge of green the islands globally is to show and see the islands not only as the country that need help, but the islands are an opportunity as laboratory innovation for the climate change, because with small investments, you can showcase 100% renewables case studies. So this is what we are trying to do with the Caribbean, with good policies and good, indeed, we need to switch from diesel to renewables. And when you say, okay, there is no budget for renewables, but as was said by my colleagues here in the panel, how many billions are spent for diesel subsidies? And it could be enough to move this money with proper policy existing from diesel to renewables. Anyway, this is the first, but anyway, we will have time to debate more on that.
But do tell us one thing, because you said these are laboratories that we can use to develop examples. Do you have one concrete example to share, perhaps?
Yes, anyway, there are many examples of laboratories on El Hierro, for instance, is an island that is almost 80% of, is not in the Caribbean, is in the Canary Islands, but anyway, where you have combination of hydropower and solar and natural storage with the altitude. Anyway, let me say islands are laboratory innovation where you can can experiment the nexus between anyway energy and water and mobility, and also the combination of the renewables between themselves, because we anyway think is granted, but the hybridization in the grid of the renewables and the interaction with the diesel engine is an innovation challenge that islands are experimenting first, let me say.
Thank you very much. Let us now take a look at that poll result. I'm going to ask our technical team to get it up on the big screens. It's there, I hear. So the ranking is number one, and this is priority challenges, so the things that are most important to solve if you want to drive the energy transition forward. Leveraging access to finance, number one. Strengthening the link between economic growth and energy policy. Addressing policy implementation gaps. Reducing the dominance of fossil fuels. Increasing regional collaboration. And improving grid integration. All of them very worthy, but that is the ranking as we see it here. I'm going to ask you, if you like, to respond to that as you go into our next round of discussion, and I have specific questions as well, but Michelle Bachelet, if I may begin with you, maybe just a quick take on what you see there, and then I have a second question.
Well, I think they're all really important because, as you said, Marcelino, the situation is uneven. Some countries face some of those as more, I would say, a big hurdle, and some others not that much. But I also would like to mention that even it's put in the fifth and sixth point, regional integration should be a really important issue. We have been trying to work on that for many years, had not been successful yet, because all of our countries have different possibilities. We have complementarity. So, of course, we need access to finance, linking economic growth, energy policy, addressing the implementation gaps. That's something that all you have to do when you develop an energy policy, but also, and of course, the idea of renewables and decarbonization is to get rid of fossil fuels. So I think all of them are needed. But also we need more integration in the region because that will help every country.
Thank you. And then quick additional question, if I may, because we see here number two, strengthening the link between economic growth and energy policy. And I'd like to give that a slightly different twist, if I may, because you have had such a strong focus on people throughout your career. So talk to us a little bit about also social policy as part of that nexus and how we manage to drive the energy transition in a way that mitigates the social impact of the climate crisis and the transition?
Well, I think on one hand, when we're talking about social policy, we need to see that in terms of energy, in the past, when there was no a single national policy, there were a lot of places in the country who were so-called as sacrifice zones because they had like 3 coal plants in one city and they had all the impact of fossil fuel energy. So we started working on how we compensate those communities that were having high levels of cancer diseases and others, how we also try to decarbonize those areas so they will have cleaner energy, and how we can give them incentives as well to be part of that. But the other thing I mentioned in the first question was how important was participation. Because when we are thinking not only in decarbonization, but also in new ways of energy like green and hydrogen, that we are working strongly on that, how we can work from the beginning, as some of you said, I think Elisa mentioned as well, with the social, with the communities, with the indigenous communities, all of them who will feel probably threatened by new projects because they have seen the results of fossil fuels energy. So, but you also can, I would say, leverage the social effects of the global economic growth, and on those places where they've been more affected, you can support them better with social policy, educational policy, health policy, etc., etc. But let me tell you just one thing about decarbonization, because for me, we're really proud of that. I mean, when we were in government, we realized that if we send the law to Parliament, it would take forever. So we decided to get into agreement with the power generation companies not to build any coal fire power plant. And this first agreement laid the groundwork for future closures agreement. And now we have the following situation. 9 coal-fired plants were retired. We have 6 others that are available to retire, and we have 5 that will be retrofitted by 2025. That means that 71% of all coal-fired plants will be out of it by 2025, and we'll continue on that. So we're very proud of that. But also, and I end, the decarbonization process gives us the opportunity to think on other energy projects like the green hydrogen that we're really committed to.
We're coming back to that, I hope, if we have enough time, because
Yes.
I know you're head of the Hydrogen Strategy Committee, so I don't want to miss that.
But I just want to say that Latin
yeah.
America is really fantastic on this. We have so much possibilities to be essential actors on low carbon, efficient resources, and particularly inclusive economies.
I think you've got us all convinced already. Minister Facio, if I can jump over to you. And again, I'm looking at that list of challenges, but I have a particular one in mind in this case, because the deployment of hydropower in your country has faced a recent setback due to droughts. And tell us how that influences your policy making going forward. It's on.
Hola. Bueno, en realidad nosotros tenemos...
Yes, that's indeed true. There are quite a few challenges that we are facing. And one thing that I think is important to mention is that the green hydrogen roadmap is an integrated long-term project that does not only include the engineering, the financing, but also means an opportunity for us to develop our society, and it's a long-term development, certainly. So we are focused on education and on developing our technical expertise, and we are also very much focused on what has already been mentioned here on the panel, the dialogue with citizens, ultimately. And these are, again, long-term projects and very far-reaching projects. And we develop these projects in regions that have a low population density, and it's important to get them on board early on to allow them to better understand the advantages and disadvantages of these projects. And that ties in with my second point, which is that we have to strengthen economic growth ties with energy policy. And I think in Uruguay, what we can't do is think these individually. We have to have economic growth, participation, and energy policies go hand in hand. And again, over 90% of our energy mix is renewables, and our population has 100% access to electricity, and that is something we are very proud of.
Indeed. Thank you very much. Going over to Secretary Rollenberg, if I may. You have a policy now seeking re-industrialization in Brazil, a new industrial policy. Can you tell us how renewable energy fits into that?
Nós lançamos recentemente uma nova política industrial.
Well, we recently indeed did publish a new industrialization policy that includes bioeconomy, decarbonization, and energy security. So it's a new policy for industrialization, and it's new because there are new conditions that we are working with. And I think Brazil can play an important role in this endeavor. We want to invite companies to speed up their decarbonization processes, and we want to lower the cost for these companies to do that. We have the impression that countries that have a lack of energy, that have a lack of resources, create subsidies that ultimately lead to higher rates of inflation, which again leads to issues in the countries themselves. And I think that part of that industrial production could be shifted to countries in which renewables are available, in which clean energy is available. In Latin America, in Brazil, Uruguay, or Chile. And hydrogen is one such example. We are the third largest producer of foodstuffs in Brazil, and we import some fertilizers and a lot of other resources. So there are a lot of things that we could actually produce ourselves, like fertilizers or other chemical products. And we could do that at a fairly low price point with clean energy. Germany, for example, uses a lot of steel. And the question is, does it make sense to import that from countries that produce them in an energy-intense way when you can import it from Brazil, where we are using renewables? So I think this is a different kind of production chain, ultimately, that we are talking about. So, of course, financing is always a central question. We had a panel this morning that talked about 500,000 women dying in Africa because they are using stoves in their kitchens that are not up to the technical standard. And I think if we look at the development, then we see that billions upon billions of dollars were invested in the energy transition, but they were used in China, in the European Union, and in the United States. I think we have to democratize the opportunities of the energy transition. Because if we fail to do that, we would not get any closer to achieving the COP28 goals. So we need a more efficient and effective cooperation in which developing countries actually benefit from this energy transition. And if we did that, we would actually speed up the entire process, and we would all ultimately benefit from this.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And let me stay with that point on finance and come to Marcelino Madrigal, also looking at this. Number one, leverage access to finance as the top-ranked challenge. So you are active in the region, not only in the area of renewable energy, of course, but also infrastructure, poverty reduction, and education. From a cross-cutting, cross-regional perspective, what do you see as the biggest challenges in access to finance?
Thank you so much. And answering your question, I will also reflect on these 2 points, which are very important. You know, if Latin America has already 60% electricity, 90% access, we contribute only to 8% of the global emissions. Why should we do an energy transition? And I think that hits into the second point. We believe there is an opportunity for economic growth in the region if we accelerate our energy transition. And this is where we are right now. The reality in the region is that, public financing is tight because after the pandemic, there is not a lot of space for public investment, but also inequality is high in the region. If we accelerate the energy transition, I think there is an opportunity to precisely do that, continue to grow and solve our core issues, including inequality, bringing access to everyone, and create jobs. You know, some countries in our region, they want to go even higher, 70% clean energy, and I think they will achieve it, like the RELAC initiative. If we were to triple renewables, like the UN, global call for tripling, we will have excess energy because we're already, almost 2/3 there. But it's not a problem. It's an opportunity to do what? Precisely to become a source for fuel to the world as the transition accelerates. And this includes hydrogen, but also, of course, the production of minerals for the energy transition. And this is, of course, why we at the IDB are increasing our financing for the energy transition. Just to be precise, 2 weeks ago, the IDB approved its new strategy, which is called BID Impact Plus, which is we're going to increase our financing. The private sector arm will receive $3.5 billion in capital increase. Our innovation lab, $400 million, with an aim to increase our lending capacity to $112 billion. The energy transition is part of that strategy, because with energy we will reduce inequality, increase productivity of the region, and solve the global challenges. So I really found very interesting how the audience replied to number 2, because I think that's the key for Latin America. Now we want to do the energy transition because it is an economic opportunity for the region.
Thank you very much. And Monica Escalante, if I can come to you to talk a little bit more about unleashing private sector capital and cooperation in this effort. Where would you say are the current bottlenecks? You said you've had strong private sector participation, but what more can you do to make them part of this drive?
Yeah, definitely. We have challenges and bottlenecks, and I would just resume it in one word. Is education. I think there is a lack of awareness in our society because I'm in the ground all day. It's what I do. And actually, as I said, we have very good numbers. We have all the resources. But sometimes it's like you don't actually understand how the society or people wouldn't respond to this, to implement the energy transition technologies in their daily lives. So I think education is so important, and that's I just want to share with you that we, as a private sector, as a company, decided to start a program for education in Panama. We call it Son Smart Kids, because then I realized that it's our children, and that will make actually the change at the end. So we started this program last year with the collaboration of the German of Commerce based in Panama, because we needed to give formality to the program, right? And we started with the private schools. We attended, visited every month a different school. We have this hands-on sessions. We bring solar panels, solar collectors. We bring EV chargers, everything. And then at the end, we impacted 500 students, and we decided to submit this program to the Sustainable Development Goals in Panama. And surprisingly, believe me, we were received a merit on this and recognition out of 36 projects in Panama. Okay, so this is just, I share it because as a private sector, we don't have to wait, only or rely only on the public sector. We can do many things if we put, actually the energy transition first, and then we understand that education is so important.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. And taking the word awareness into a slightly different context, let me go to Gianni Chianetta and ask you to talk a little bit about the role of the Greening the Islands Foundation in helping different islands with their very unique situations deal with this whole array of challenges that we see here.
Absolutely, anyway, and I'm not surprised that number one is leverage access to finance, and because in the islands there are a lot of, anyway, they need a structure and a standardized approach. Our goal is Greening the Islands. We launched an initiative called 100% Renewables Islands Initiative. It's a global initiative supported by the United Nations as the cooperation of the Global Renewable Alliance. And our goal is really to define the roadmaps to 100% renewables of these islands, and let me say, identify with a local stakeholder committee that engage the industry, the people, etc., with the leadership of the government, what is the best roadmap and what are the projects make sense in the islands. Building a project teaser map that together can build a pipeline so project can be aggregated and be attractive for public and private finance. So the islands are approached individually by individual companies, and they are confused where to go anyway, which technology. So we are trying to create a standardized approach that engage the community and actually filling the gap between the idea of reaching 100% renewables and what data the investor, public funds need to finance. So this is really the gap we are trying to reach with these 100% renewables. Actually, at SITS4 in Antigua, at the UN conference, we are going to present jointly with UN 3 roadmaps of Curaçao, Rodriguez for the Pacific, and Tonga. And this will be the first of many islands join the initiative. And I hope, anyway, many industry and many NGOs will join us to bring, anyway, input, feedback, and value on such initiative.
Thank you very much. We have very, very little time left, but I want to do one super quick round where I ask all of you quite simply to talk about what would be your top priority in international cooperation, whatever it is. I know Michelle Bachelet wanted to talk about green hydrogen, so you're welcome to fit that into that matrix, but I would like to try to get all of the panel to say a word, because one of the things that you're talking about and suggesting is that with your wealth of resources, with your big ambitions for green hydrogen, we could see some fundamental shifts in industrial patterns and trade. That's a very disruptive process that you're talking about. So again, I'd be very interested in your perspectives. Briefly, Michelle Bachelet,
Well,
please.
we have a minute for 7 people. So I just want to say, I think international cooperation is key on finance, of course, but also in terms of sharing experiences and sharing knowledge. And being able that cooperation is not the kind of cooperation where there is investment and nothing it's in the country afterwards. We need to, whatever cooperation is in finance or foreign investment, we need that will mean, I would say, a positive, beneficial consequences for the country, its development, for the communities and for everyone. So we want that kind of cooperation, the cooperation that leads in the country something beneficial that could permit it that we can also continue on.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. Minister Facio.
Bueno, nosotros en realidad entendemos que es muy importante evaluar.
From our point of view, it is very important
Y de la calidad de los recursos involucrados. Estamos hablando
that
de cuáles son los
we look at the quality of resources. We look at the standards that are needed internationally for any specific kind of energy source, and that guarantee that a product was produced with renewables. I think that is absolutely vital. And as we've just heard, in order to guarantee financing for projects, that is important because there are new technologies, and again, we don't exactly know how these technologies are going to develop. So we think that international standards are important, but also that they are standards we can actually reach.
That's the subject of a whole panel that we will have tomorrow on green hydrogen. So please join us. Over to Secretary Rollenberg.
Eu diria que o Brasil quer aproveitar
Now,
a condição de líder
for me and for Brazil, I'd say that
para promover uma grande cooperação
we are also looking at the G20 presidency, and we want to push international cooperation when it comes to fighting climate change. And of course, we have to keep an eye on the particularities of countries, the technological developments in those countries, and to do this to the benefit of all countries worldwide.
A win-win. Thank you very much. And let me go to Marcelino Madrigal.
Really quickly, I would say deep, integrated, and resilient grids is going to be key for Latin America. Uruguay has 100% clean energy also thanks because they are highly integrated with the neighbors. I think in Latin America, we will need to do more as we deeply decarbonize our electricity grids. And second, decarbonization on transport and industry. That's where our emissions are now in the energy sector, and our industry needs to keep competitiveness in the world. So we need to push the envelope on decarbonization on transport and industry is where more international cooperation is required.
Thank you.
Well,
Monica Escalante.
I think it's would be share innovation and also knowledge transfer. I think it's so important for our region, and more cooperation between regions, because we have a lot of to learn from everyone. Yeah.
Thank you. Finally, Gianni Chianetta.
Yes, indeed, international cooperation between the public and private sector, because in the past, and let me say even now, there is sometimes a wall, but if this cooperation is regulated, is transparent, is essential for anyway increase financing. And when I talk public and private at the international level, I want to talk about the private and local level of, for instance, talk about islands, the islands economy, the island small companies need to be engaged, and we create a representation of the islands company in a way that they are engaged and benefit involved in the investment, in the construction, in the maintenance of the plant. So private, public at international level between local companies and international bodies as well.
Thank you. Thank you very, very much to all of you. What a thought-provoking and enriching discussion for all of us. I take a lot with me, and I'm sure the audience does as well. Let's give them a warm round.